Before we practice with list comprehension, let's see one more thing that it can do, which is quite powerful. We can actually add conditional logic to our list comprehension using keywords that we've seen before, like if and else. In our first example here, we have a list of numbers from 1 to 6. It's called numbers. And we have two new lists of odd and even numbers based on the conditional logic at the end of the list comprehension. So that's right here and right here. So we're just saying take every num, add it to a new list for each num in numbers if that num is divisible by 2, meaning it's even, a num mod 2 is equal to 0, or in this example, num mod 2 is not equal to 0. So important to know, the if keyword needs to come at the end after the name of the list, or whatever we are iterating through, a string or a range. If you're using an else keyword, things look a little bit different. This might look confusing, kind of is, and it just takes a bit of practice to get used to. So you might be wondering, how exactly do you possibly remember all of this? Well, I kind of forget the syntax a lot, especially when we add the else in, and I look it up when I need to, to build the slide, or if I'm using it in code somewhere. It's not too bad to just go find it online. There's so many posts on Stack Overflow or tutorials about it. So I would just recommend that you be willing to look things up and don't feel like you have to just commit everything to memory immediately, because then you'll just get too hung up on the syntax and not the conceptual stuff behind it. Okay, with that little diatribe over, let's look at this example and try and walk through it. So there's a start of a list comprehension here, but then we have an if, and then an else, and then for num in numbers. So the syntax is definitely different. But what this will do is it will take even numbers and multiply them by 2 if they're even. And otherwise, the only other situation is that they're odd, it will divide them by 2. So for every num in numbers from 1 to 6, if it's even, if num mod 2 is 0, multiply it by 2. So that's how we get 4 and 8 and 12. Otherwise, divide it by 2. And that's how we get 0.5, 1.5, and 2.5. And we can also combine this with the in keyword to check for certain conditions. So here we're taking a string and turning it into a list with no vowels and joining it back into a string if the character is not in the list of vowels. So here we have, this is so much fun, ! With vowels. That's the name of the variable. And then we're using join, which we saw earlier. We're doing char for char, so for each character in with vowels. If the character is not in A, E, I, O, or U, then we will join it together into the string. So it will take each item in this list. This is going to generate a list, and then it joins them together. So it might help to walk through this example. I'll make some space here. So remember how just join works on its own. We would do something like this. Dot join, and then in parentheses, pass in a list, like one, let's do words. And we have an extra period there. Okay, and it joins every item in that list with an empty string, but if we added a space or ... it joins them with that, whatever we call it on, it's a string method. So that should be review, but then when we pass this in, this list comprehension, the result is this list right here. Basically, we're removing all vowels from this is so much fun. So for each character in that this is so much fun string, if the character is not in A, E, I, O, U, then we'll add it to the list. So we end up with this list where there's no vowels. And then we join that together using an empty string. And that's how we get this, something like that. All right, there's a lot to list comprehension. I know it might be overwhelming. So we have some practice after this video. Get some practice, get some experience with them. If you have questions lingering on any of the examples, I recommend you try running them yourself and tweaking them and see what happens. It's easier to walk through and try and piece together how things work. So as I mentioned, not to freak you out too much, but try and get comfortable with the syntax. You don't have to memorize everything. You don't have to be able to do a list comprehension with an if and an else condition right away. But when we do push on, we get to things like dictionaries. We'll be using their own kind of comprehension. Same thing with sets. And so it's good to get the fundamentals down now. Okay, so get some practice. Post questions if you have them. And don't panic. This is a really cool part of Python in my opinion. So don't let the newness of it depress you, discourage you. How about that? All right, I'm going to be quiet. Goodbye.